Now, the Indian Supreme Court has pronounced its verdict in the wake of Shaheen Bagh protests, which lasted for more than 3 months in Delhi last year. Shaheen Bagh protests were carried out against the implementation of the Centre's Citizenship Amendment Act and National Register for Citizens. The protests led to massive disruption of traffic affecting the biggest suburbs of Delhi. The protest site was also witness to violent altercation and massive deployment of the police force. The Supreme Court, in its verdict, observed that protesters cannot occupy a public space for indefinite time. The court also observed that peaceful protest is indeed a constitutional right, but it should take place at a designated place. The Supreme Court also observed that local administration is empowered to take decision to clear the protest site. The protests led to occupation of a major arterial road in Delhi, creating massive inconvenience. This verdict will create a major precedent for the state and central government in the way they would deal with the protesters in future. The petitioners had asked the Supreme Court to issue guidelines in detail for protests like these. And so Delhi too has designated spaces for protests. In 1980s, political parties protested in the parliament, which is popularly known as Boat Club. The protest site was subsequently shifted to Jantar Mantar. Now, protests in Delhi are only allowed in Ram Leela ground. Let's quickly get in a sense of perspective on this Supreme Court verdict that has just arrived. For more on that, let's quickly go across to our political editor, Kartikeya Sharma, who's joining us with more insights on this news story. Kartikeya, clearly this is a monumental decision. Do elaborate on how impactful this verdict is before we get further perspective on this.
See, every state has a rule. They have clearly defined public spaces where certain protests can take place. For example, in Delhi, the earlier protests would take place at Boat Club, which is a stone throw away from the Indian Parliament, 100 meters away from the first gate of the Parliament. Now, subsequently, it got shifted to a lane which is nearby called Jantar Mantar. Now, it's the Ram Leela ground. But saying that, now what has happened in the court is that the petitioners went to the Supreme Court of India and they asked Supreme Court to clearly dictate a guideline as to how the protest can take place. Now, just to jog our memories, the Shaheen Bagh protest blocked an arterial road, causing massive public disruption. Now, protest is a constitutional right. So, court said in its verdict, saying though peaceful protest is a constitutional right, people do not have the right to block public places indefinitely. The court in its verdict also said that the local administration is empowered to clear the area of those places which are of public importance, causing inconvenience to public, and administration can actually go and clear them. Now, and the third and the most important aspect is when the court says that there are designated areas, the protest should take place only in those designated areas. So there are three things. One, it creates a precedent both at the level of the center and state. Second, it somehow formalizes the grey area of what is a designated place of protest. And thirdly, and the most importantly, it also creates a sort of a firm definition of protest in public place, protest at a designated public place, and indefinite protest at a public place cannot be allowed. So now the constitutional debate on this issue that protest as a fundamental right comes to rest in India, whereby the highest court of the land says you can protest. The protest should be peaceful, but only in designated areas. Protest cannot create public inconvenience. And we have seen in 60s and 70s, there used to be a joke that the city of Calcutta in the West Bengal used to be working only half the year, because the rest of the other half of the year, the city would be closed in the name of democracy or the worker unions or in the name of larger interest.
Right. Certainly a very influential verdict, as you just pointed out. Also, Kartikeya, how do you view the verdict in context of a parliamentary democracy, especially at a time when half the world is witnessing protests, be it over race, gender, or even democracy?
See, there are two things here. India is a democratic system. India is a functional democracy. India is one of the few post-colonial nations to have successive runs with elections without any disruption. If you look at the history of Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, there have been massive disruptions where democracy remained suspended because of various reasons. Pakistan is the worst example. Afghanistan itself is almost a failed state. Now, if we talk about occupation of public spaces for a larger good, then those have taken place in autocratic societies. For example, Tahrir Square protest, whereby people came and they protested against the regime, or something which we know as the Velvet Revolution, which shook the foundation of communism in 1980s. But then those were in autocratic states. Or, for example, the protests which took place in West Asia against autocratic regimes like Syria, or the protests which rocked multiple countries, subsequently created a regime change, for example, Libya. But then those are different protests. And lastly, the protests which take place in advanced countries or the industrialized countries are different in nature. They are not they don't end up completely disrupting the city life. For example, Occupy the Wall Street protest. So there are different layers of protest, but this one, primarily which took place in Delhi, the decision came in the context of, can you occupy a road forever? Can you create inconvenience to public forever? I think it is in this light the verdict has come, but it acknowledges that peaceful protest is part of our fundamental right. It's a constitutional right that we Indians enjoy. But then there's a rule. You've got to go to a designated place.
Absolutely. Very important to highlight that it's in the light of highlighting the fact that you cannot be occupying public spaces. Let's leave it at that. Thank you so much, Kartikeya, for bringing us those details.